So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for coming out in such huge numbers. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, I think is the material that I have. I added a little bit of content on the plane this morning to kind of modernize it a little bit, so there's a couple of video clips in there, maybe it'll be 41, 42 minutes. And then I'm happy to do discussion, Q&A about everything that I talked about. What's fascinating about this talk to me is that it's already been kind of 6 years, and it's been longer than that, really, but 6 years of practicing kind of a different way of building and designing digital products and services. So let's get started. So here's where the story starts. The story starts 10 years ago. Now, 10 years ago, I took a job. I moved back to New York City. I was working in the West Coast at a company in Portland, Oregon called Web Trends as the director of user experience. And I moved back to the East Coast. So I turned down the job here in Düsseldorf, and I moved back to the East Coast. And I ended up running a company, running a design team at a company called The Ladders. The Ladders at the time was a job board in New York that matched people who were looking for jobs that paid $100,000 or more. That was kind of an executive search job board type of thing. Now, the interesting thing when I took that job is I had two responsibilities at that time. One was I had to build a design team, and the second was that the Ladders was turning into an agile organization, not unlike the Greek drama that we just went through, which was super cool, right? And so my job was to build a team, and not only build a design team, but build a design team that works in Agile, right? That was my responsibility. Now, 10 years ago, if you went to Google and you typed in Agile and UX, this is what came up, right? It was just nothing good came up. Literally, it was just a trail of tears and heartbreak and loneliness, you know. I mean, really, if you ran a search 10 years ago for that, it would be things like Agile sucks, there's no place for design in it, right? These two things don't make any sense together, they don't work together, this is not a thing. Not unlike the kind of the Greek drama that we saw here a second ago. And to me, that was both frustrating and then kind of inspirational. I said, okay, well, people have tried this, clearly, because there's all this frustration. Let's go talk to the people that this didn't work for. And so we did that. We went out and we talked to a variety of different companies to understand what worked for them and where this thing really failed for them. And we took all those anti-patterns and we put them to use, we put them to practice with our teams at the Ladders. Now I'll give you a sense, at its biggest, the company was about 400 people. And so we had about 7 or 8 teams running at the same time, usually. And so we try a bunch of things. We tried taking we were a waterfall shop, and we had a 9-month software development process. So we tried to take that process and condense it down into a 2-week sprint, and that didn't work. And then we tried a couple of other variations and trying to kind of not do the things that these other people did. And then after about 6 months of experimentation, it felt like we had figured it out. At least from my perspective as the manager of the design team, it felt to us like we had finally figured it out. Like the number of complaints had gone down. People just didn't seem to really kind of bring a process as an issue anymore. And so this became, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was like, hey, we did it, we solved it, we solved this Agile UX thing that no one had solved yet, right? And it was fantastic. And so I was feeling very good about myself as a manager, you know. And I came into work one day, it was a Monday morning, and I get to my desk, and on my desk there is a sheet of paper. And on that sheet of paper was this diagram. Now, if you look at this diagram, what you'll see, perhaps most importantly, is the title of this diagram. The title is up here. It says UX, and it is Agile and UX at the Ladders, diagramming a negative environment. Right? So this isn't a positive chart, right? And if you look at kind of all the boxes and all the arrows, right, where do they point? They point to the center, and the thing at the center basically says Agile and UX at the Ladders creates a negative environment that fosters failure and generates low morale. So clearly, we were not nearly as successful as I thought we had been at that point. What this is, by the way, this is my team. They went off by themselves, and they had kind of a venting session, And this was the output of that. They diagrammed their feelings, and these were their feelings and frustrations with the way that we were designing products at the time at the ladders. Now, there's a lot of stuff on here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm going to point out a few of the most important ones and the ones that really helped us rethink the way that we work, and that really were the pivot points for our mindset, ultimately our process, and our success in fixing our process. So first and foremost is this: the best experience never ever gets built, right? And this comes, again, remember, everybody who did this came from a waterfall mindset. Now, in a waterfall mindset, there's a design phase, right? Now, whether it's 3 days or 3 months, it doesn't matter. There was a design phase. And so at least you had some time to design the best possible experience that you could, and then hopefully it would get built. But with Agile, we had 2 weeks, right? And this concept of iteration wasn't in our brains yet. We were, waterfall is an incremental development methodology where you make stuff, and then you make more stuff, and then you make more stuff. But you rarely go back and fix the stuff that you already made. So in this case, the team was feeling, well, hey, look, I have 2 weeks to design something, and we're never going back and fixing it, so the best experience never, ever gets built. So we clearly had to change how the team thought, or how the team thought about iteration versus incremental software development. Because of this, the UX team didn't feel business critical. Right? If all I'm doing is the least amount of work that I can possibly do to get done in this time frame so we can move on to the next sprint and the next sprint, then I just feel like a factory worker, right? I'm not contributing strategically, I'm not contributing as a team member, we're just kind of feeding the beast, right? There's this thing of like, well, if the developers don't have something to code, something terrible will happen, right? So we've got to hurry up and get the designs out there. And this was an issue. If our UX designers aren't feeling business critical, they're going to walk. They're going to go somewhere else. Now down there in the bottom, it says Agile projects are never complete. Look, one of the great things about waterfall is that projects end, right? There's an end, right? There's a roadmap, there's a timeline, there's a ship date, you ship, right? And then you have a party, you get a t-shirt, and then you kind of go on to the next, right? The next project or whatever it is. And so there was a target. There was something to shoot for, right? There was, June 1st, 2018 or whatever it is. That's our ship date. With the Agile projects, the way that we had done the process at the time of this diagram, there was no end to the projects, right? There was no target. There was no milestone for the teams to shoot for. It was just 2-week sprints. 2-week sprints, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, right? And you're going to burn out if there's no sense of accomplishment or no sense of a real kind of a big feeling of done. So then the question for us was, okay, if we're not shooting for a fixed date and fixed scope, which is kind of the downfall of waterfall, right? Then how do we define these kind of milestones? How do we define that the project is done so the team feels like if they're sprinting towards something? And that was a big change for us. We'll definitely talk about that as the talk goes on. Now, this other thing here is this no ideation time. This was really fascinating, again, for us as a big challenge, right? Because if the teams are trying to feed the beast as designers, there's no time for them to think about the work that they're doing. Again, if there's a design phase, again, even if it's 3 days, as the design team, you can do what you want with those 3 days. Right? So I'm going to take one of those 3 days and we're just going to ideate. We're just going to brainstorm stuff. Right? How do we find that time in an Agile sprint, in a Scrum model? And for us, that was a big issue about how to staff and how to buy the time for teams to work that way. And that changed the way that we staffed our teams. And then lastly was this concept of minimum viable product. And we're going to talk a lot about that in this talk as well. Everybody, the designers felt like minimum viable product was kind of the minimally desirable product. Right? And the engineers felt like it was the minimally functional product. And the marketers felt like it was the minimally marketable product, right? So everybody's got a different definition of what this is. How do you decide when you're ready to put something in front of customers? And that was a huge issue for us because there was always a push and pull of like, well, can we ship it? Can we not ship it? Can we pull it back? That type of thing. There was a lot of conflict because of a poor definition of what that was and what that meant. So we're going to talk about that and really building a shared understanding of what all this meant. Now here's the thing. All of these ideas, plus the other things that are in here as well, helped us to refocus our process. And as we started to solve for all of these boxes, look in hindsight, right? 10 years of hindsight now, this diagram really was the turning point in my understanding, at least, of how to build a more collaborative product development and design process. And as we started to solve all of these boxes one at a time and ultimately build a process that worked for us, we started to publish these ideas publicly. And kind of the conversation went global 6.5 years ago. When Smashing Magazine published, was kind enough. I actually saw Vitaly Friedman recently in Zurich this summer, in fact. And I thanked him again because really he gave me a platform 6.5 years ago and let me write this article called Lean UX Getting Out of the Deliverables Business. And this really took the conversation global. All of a sudden, we were out of our bubble. We had kind of fixed our problem at the ladders, but that was a unique context with a unique set of people and a unique domain. We took this global, all of a sudden the conversation gets really interesting. People are asking questions, they're offering up their points of view and their expertise, and it led to a lot of things. It kind of blew open this conversation globally. Now, from this article, right, starting to write, getting these ideas out there, it got me on a bunch of stages all over the world, like talking about this kind of stuff, right? So like lots of talks. We wrote a book called Lean UX. In fact, we wrote it twice. There's a second edition that came out last year, right? There was that. We did Lean UX, the Broadway musical. We didn't do that one. We did. Look, there's Josh. You see Josh up there? No, we didn't do that. That'd be funny though. We did, and if you're interested in this is a never-ending conversation, 24/7, 365 on Twitter. If you follow this hashtag, it's active all day. I follow it. It's active all day long, and people are actively discussing these topics on Twitter all the time. Now, what this led for me is it's got me like literally just kind of going all over the world, speaking with teams, working with teams, coaching teams, teaching, meeting folks in different kinds of contexts, in different industries, and in different cultures, and really trying to understand where are the common themes in making Agile and UX and design work really well together in this world. And in all that travel and all that, all those talks and all those conversations, it was pretty clear, right, that two things emerged, right? Two specific things emerged. Now, the first thing is this. Look, the way that we were doing design had to change, right? To me, if there's one big theme to think through, the way that we do design had to change at that time. And I'm going to talk about 3 specific ways that design has to change in just a second. But that was the first thing. Design had to change. We couldn't go forward and continue working the same way that we had continued to work. We can't do that anymore. Now, but that's not it, right? That's not enough. The other thing that had to happen was that the rest of the organization had to change as well, right? The way we make the sausage, right? The product development process also had to change as well, right? The people that we worked with, it's kind of a disgusting GIF after a while. You kind of look at it, right? At first you're like, oh, ew, it's gross, right? But the product development process also had to change, right? It's not enough for design to change, because you change alone, it doesn't work that way in this world. And there's at least 3 ways that product development had to change to support this way of working as well. I'm going to talk about those. Now, before we jump into those kind of steps of how design has to change and how product development has to change, I want to get one thing out of the way, and it's really important, okay? And I see this conversation happening less and less and less, which is really good, okay? Lean UX is Agile UX, right? There's no difference between those two. Now, these diagrams made the rounds for a while. I don't see them as often anymore, which is good. But I want to kind of end the confusion that essentially the way that we practice, UX today in this Agile world, it is Lean UX. It's kind of a different mentality of thinking about how design integrates into this Agile process. If you see it called whatever, don't get hung up on the term. The bottom line is that UX today has to be lean, it has to be Agile, right? That's the way that everybody works, and it's the only way to move forward. Okay, it really, at the end of the day, it's really kind of a mindset that's applied to the design process or to the UX process. So let's talk about the changes, right? So 3 big learnings for design. And again, this is not a comprehensive list, right? These are just the 3 biggest themes for what I've seen in how design has to change to adapt and work in an agile world. Okay, first and foremost is this. We have got to start to move away from these archival documents. Now remember, coming out of a waterfall world, and really even today, I still see with a lot of companies that I work with, right, there's this desire to document everything, right? I spent the first half of my career creating documentation, right? Documentation that on a good day, 50% of it would end up in the trash, right? 50% of it would never end up getting developed. Right, which to me was a colossal waste of my time. How do we move away from those archives to transient artifacts? Right? To me is how do we start to change the nature of what we produce as designers to fit the model of a sprint model, of an iteration, of a learning model. And the concept really here is, at the risk of getting a little tongue-in-cheek, is this idea of minimum viable conversation. Right? If you think about it, it kind of breaks down pretty cleanly into this. Right? It's every time that you're creating something, right? There's 3 questions to answer. Right? What do I need to communicate? That's the first question. Right? What am I trying to get across? Right? What's the most important thing that I need to get across right now in this next conversation? Second thing, who do I need to communicate it to? Is it the customer? Is it my developers? Is it my product manager, my boss, the CEO? A buyer, right? Whoever it is, right? Who do I need to communicate it to? And then most importantly, what's the least amount of effort I need to communicate it? Right? That's your minimum viable conversation. Now that index card right there, right? If I need to describe how I envision a feature to the developer who's sitting next to me, right? And she and I work together every day, right? We know each other, we have a shared language, we have a shared vocabulary, we're working on the same project all the time, right? That index card with my hand sketch on it, that's enough, right? That's what I need to create to communicate what's in my head to her, right? But if I have to communicate that idea to a client or the CEO or somebody who can't extrapolate from a hand-drawn sketch to a full-blown interface, right? Maybe you have to create something a bit more heavy. Right? Again, what are you trying to communicate? Who do I need to communicate it to? And what's the least amount of effort I need to communicate it? All you're trying to do is move the conversation forward. That's it. And you don't have to take it forward to the end, just the next step forward, right? And so as a designer, right, or anybody else really, this is a great way to kind of structure your thought process about what you're going to create today. Right? If you've got users coming in for usability testing, right, you've got to build something that they can move through, that they can understand, right? And so you have to determine kind of what level of fidelity you want to use for that, right? Again, who are you trying to communicate, and what's the least amount of work that you can do that? That's the first thing that has to change in design, is to really move away from this kind of, well, we have to design the whole thing, right, so that people will understand it. Second thing that has to change in design, radical transparency. This is the key. The old school Wonder Woman, not the new school, right? Radical transparency. There was a time where, and I believe it or not, I still see it today with practitioners who are steeped in lean startup and Agile and UX and design. Well, people kind of hide their work until it's ready, until it's done, until it's finished. And at that point, right, it's too late, right? You've already done work that's not going to get delivered. Right? So the design process has to open up. Right? Remember, the nice thing about the design phase of a waterfall process is that that was like the designer's time that we could do whatever we wanted with. It was this magical black box that requirements would come in one end, and then design would happen, and then beautiful things would come out the other end. Right? We don't have that luxury anymore. Right? We lost that luxury years ago. Right? And we definitely don't have it today. And the idea is, how do you open up the design process in such a way that it starts to include non-designers? When I started writing about this 6 years ago, 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, I got a lot of hate mail, like a lot of from designers who were like, don't you dare start inviting clients into the design process. Right? Or engineers or product managers or whoever else, right? This is our world, we're the experts, right? We've got to open that up. Because the sooner that your clients start to give you feedback, the sooner that your engineers start to give you feedback, your bosses, your CEOs, whoever, the sooner you can start to iterate that design towards something that's actually feasible and makes sense for your business, right? So being radically transparent in the design process is also key. Now, the last thing I want you to think about as a designer in the way that you're in changing the way that you work, and again, this is not comprehensive, just the top 3 things to think through is this. We've got to start changing, if we're practicing kind of these minimally viable conversations in a radically transparent way, we've got to start to move away from a formal design, critique, and review process to a much more informal, continuous conversation, right? At the beginning of my career, I used to work at a company called AOL. It's sad. What do they call it today? Oath or something like that? The most terrifying meeting in my kind of monthly routine was the design review meeting. You'd walk into a room, there'd be 25 vice presidents sitting around a big table, and you've got your design on paper, of course, because that's how people experience digital products, right? And my hands are shaking, you're walking in the room, and you kind of put this piece of paper in front of 25 vice presidents, and they're all there for this meeting, so they're all going to say something, right? Because they got to justify their presence, right? And they'll say, and the questions come, rapid fire. Why is it red? Why is it blue? Why is it here? Why is it there? Why does it say this? Right? On and on and on, and you come out of there just kind of beaten up and abused, right? Now, if you had informal conversations with all of those VPs in advance where they kind of saw it, gave you feedback, you iterated, you showed them how you were taking their feedback into account. By the time that meeting happened, it was just a check off, right? Hey, we did it. Great, let's move forward, right? The idea is by opening up the design process, by including people who you would not normally design, by only creating the things that you need to create, right, in the lightest form, we're creating a continuous conversation with the people that we work with and the people who consume our products and services. What that allows us to do is take the mystery of, are we building good stuff out of it? Are we designing good stuff here? And kind of start to break that down into much smaller chunks, right? And the less formal it is and the more regular it is, the easier it becomes to actually adjust our designs, right? The ego takes a smaller hit when you've only worked on something for a week, or you've only sketched it out, or in some Post-it notes, or whatever it is. The lower the investment, the easier it is to change course. So we move away from these kind of interrogation type style design review sessions to a much more informal, continuous, much more kind of low investment type of process. So those are the 3 things for design, at least the top 3 things that I would want you to think about. Now, product development also has to change, right? So that we avoid situations like this as well, right? And again, lots of changes to be made there as well, but as the themes that have emerged, the top 3 that kind of come up for product development to change are this. And perhaps this next one is the first one, it's number 1, it's the most important thing, and it's this. It's my water. This one's frustrating. Look, this happens today, every day at companies all over the world, right? We ship products and no one's asking, so what, right? The definition of success is shipping the product, but no one actually asks whether or not has anybody used it, do they like it, does it change their behavior in any kind of meaningful way, does it make them more successful, does it make them a better customer, does it make them a better client, right? What is the outcome that the thing that we shipped actually had on people, right? Where is the change in behavior that we're actually looking for, right? We, just because it seemed cool, it seemed like a good idea, right? And we shipped it, doesn't mean that it makes sense, or that anybody would actually want to use it, or fly in it, or whatever it is, right? No one was asking, so what? Certainly not in the waterfall world, and even as we moved into the Agile world, right, particularly on the product development side, the focus was on velocity, right? Get things out the door quickly, and the faster you can get them out the door, the better. But nobody's asking, is anybody using it? Does it make sense? Does anybody want to use it? And the conversation that has to shift in product development, and in the way that we assign work, and in the way that we measure success, is to move the discussion away from output being the creation of features, right? the shipping of features, to outcomes. Outcomes being the changes in customer behavior that drive our business success. That's the key. Outcomes answer the so what question. Outcomes are the measures of of behavior in the people that we make products and services for, right? These become our mileposts. These become, if you think about it, I told you in that big kind of, where my team did that diagram at the beginning, right? They said, what are we shooting for? What's the end goal, right? The end goal is an outcome. Increase retention by 50%, right? Get people to you know, like, if you think about like Slack had this magic, if you read about kind of all the growth stories of Slack, right? They talk about their magic number. If a team hit, I think it was something like 2,000 messages in the first 2 weeks of use, they would stick with the product. Right? That's an outcome. What features get them to do that? That's our job. We'll figure it out, right? We don't know, right? That's the whole point, is that we don't know. And so our measure of success has to become outcomes to answer the so what. Perhaps that's the most important change in kind of Lean UX and in Lean Startup and Agile product development, is to move towards outcomes. Now, the second thing is this. Look, the pace of learning has to reflect market realities. In other words, delivery is not the only thing that we're striving to achieve in every iteration and in every sprint, right? We're also striving to learn whether the thing that we delivered changed customer behavior for the better. Did it improve the outcomes, or did it make them worse? And the beautiful thing about the world that we live in today is that we can learn as fast as we want. All you have to do is invest in the technology to deploy continuously, to analyze customer usage, and to do qualitative research to truly understand what people are doing with the products that you're pushing live. I mean, there's a reason why I kind of put Amazon on here, because they're my favorite example of continuous delivery and continuous learning. Amazon pushes code to production every 11.6 seconds. Right? 5 times a minute. Some Amazon customer somewhere in the world experiences new code, right? Now, these aren't radical redesigns or shifts of the products or that type of thing. It's an opportunity for them to put out new tests, new ideas, to see how they affect customer behavior, and then to roll back from that. And we have to value that learning that tells us that the idea that we had going forward for the next sprint or 2 sprints from now may not be a good idea. And we need to change course. That's being agile, right? If you want to implement agile, think about it as agility with a lowercase a instead of the religion with the capital A, right? And if we're learning on a regular basis, then we're adjusting course. And if we're adjusting course, then we're being agile. And learning, and again, for learning, to be clear, for learning to take place, you deliver less stuff because you've got a finite amount of people, you've got a finite amount of time, right? So if you're going to do some discovery, some learning activities, the delivery activities inevitably are going to slow down, and that's okay. We want to make sure we're delivering the right things. Now, the amazing thing that happens here is if you actually start to think about outcomes and you start to value learning, what you can start doing is developing a continuous conversation with the market, with your employees, with various people that you have to talk to understand how well your products are working. This is the greatest photo on the internet. I could not find a better photo than this one. The continuous conversation is what ultimately drives the learning. And the way that it works is this, right? This is that kind of Amazon, that continuous deployment model where you ship something quickly, you sense the impact that it has on customer behavior, on the outcome, and then you respond to that as quickly as you can, right? Hey, we shipped that test or that new thing. How are we doing on retention? Well, it drove retention down. Well, let's figure out why and let's adjust. Right? Oh, it's driving retention up. Terrific. Let's figure out why, and let's scale it out, and let's optimize it so we can increase retention even more. Now, the thing to take away from this slide is this. Shipping continuously and sensing continuously are a matter of financial investment. Right? Your company has to want to do this and spend the money on the infrastructure, continuous deployment, integration, automated testing, analytics, reporting, qualitative research, right? All of those types of things, user research, right? That type of thing, right? Those are financial investments. Responding is a cultural shift. Right? No amount of money is going to make it safe for you to ship something sense that it was wrong, and then be able to stand up in a safe environment in front of your bosses or your colleagues and say, I was wrong, or the team didn't get it right. Right? There has to be a culture that says it's okay to respond. Now again, the faster you can do this, the lower the investment, the easier it is to be wrong. Right? If it takes you 9 months to find this out, and I'm your boss, I'm going to be pissed, for sure. But if it took you 9 hours, or a day, or 2 days, it's a different story, right, about that. And so moving that forward. And again, I want you to take this away as well. This is not just a design challenge, right? Nor is it just a product development challenge, particularly when you start to get into the kind of the respond side of things. Like, how do you create the kind of culture that supports learning and supports a place where it's safe to be wrong, right? Ultimately, like, the whole organization has to shift, right? We have to think through how we reconstruct the company and the culture to support an integrated design, engineering, and product management practice that focuses on customer behavior as a measure of success, and that iterates its way to the right combination of code, copy, and design to achieve optimal customer success, right? And that's not how most companies are set up today. It's not how most companies work. But I've got some suggestions about how to get those companies to work. Now, there's a few qualities to think through. The first is this: it's humility. It's in short supply. This is something that is, it's an organizational state of mind that allows the best experiences to emerge over time. This it's an acknowledgement from the CEO to the designer and the engineers that says that we cannot predict the future, that creating software is complex and unpredictable, that humans are unpredictable, and that we may get some things wrong, and that the things that we work on are our best guesses. There are assumptions. I'll prove it to you. Let me show you a couple of examples. Let's do this really quick. Real quick poll. How many of you are runners? How many of you run? That's it. That's it. Like, I mean, for exercise, like not while you're being chased. Yeah, okay, right? We all run when we're being chased, right? But, okay, so for those of you who are runners, I know it's cold, but come on. Keep your hand up if while you're running, you pause, take some photos, upload them to social media, and then keep running. Keep your hand up. Right? There's always one. Yeah, there's one guy in the front, right? There's always one guy. But for the rest of us, and wait for it, it's coming. Don't worry. Why don't we do it, right? We don't do it because it's stupid, right? It's dumb. Like, we're out exercising. We're not on a nature walk, right? I'm out there to run, to exercise, to get it over with, and get on with my day. I'm not there to take photos. But it turns out when you run past things, right? And you run past scenery. Now, I was out running. I run sometimes, not all the time. I was running on Venice Beach in California. This is a couple summers ago now. Venice Beach is lovely, and at the time I didn't live anywhere that had palm trees. So palm trees were cool to me, and there was a beach, and it was warm, and there was all this stuff. And I was using an app called Map My Run. You guys know that app? Do you know what it does? Take a guess. It maps your run. Yeah, it's pretty good, right? pretty good stuff there. So, good branding. So I'm running on Venice Beach. Venice Beach has a pier that goes out into the Pacific Ocean for about 1 kilometer. I got out to the end of it, and you run out of land. And so I paused the app for a second. I got to the end. I paused the app, and the app says, this screen comes up, and it said, hey, listen, do you want to take photos while you're running and upload them to social media? And look, and again, this is what I'm looking at. Again, so it's palm trees and birds and surfers and sunrises and the whole thing. And to me, that sounds fantastic because it's all cool. And it said, it says MVP, go MVP, which I like. So I said, sure, I want to do that. And so I tap that, and the next screen comes up and it says, terrific, you have to give us $30 to do that. Right? Now look, Map My Run could have done the same thing, kind of essentially a survey, right, which is what we did here just a minute ago, right? Was how many of you would do this? 99% of the people say, no, let's not build this. Instead, they took a position of humility, and they said, maybe there's an opportunity here. We don't really know. What's the least amount of effort we can put forward to figure this out? 2 modal overlays that don't do anything except see if you want to do this at a specific time and place, and will you pay for it? And that's it. right? All of a sudden, they're starting to get customer feedback on whether this is a worthwhile investment. Should we build these features? Should we design these features, right? That's humility. Right? If they don't get enough people saying, yes, I want it, and yes, I'll pay for it, they can adjust the test, they can adjust the timing, the price points, until they find something that's maybe worthwhile for them to do, or just disregard this. Right? But it builds humility into the process that simply says, we don't know everything, even though we're really good designers or we're really good product managers or engineers, we don't know everything, right? Because the future of software development is foggy, right? You can only see so far out. But anything beyond, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks starts to get really, really distant. You don't really know what's going to happen at that point. And we've got to stop making product decisions like this, right? This is essentially how most companies make product decisions, right? And design decisions. I think this will work really well, right? I think this is a great design. Who cares what you think? Right? Ultimately, yeah, put your best foot forward, right? Put your expert opinion forward to solve this problem, but then get some real customer feedback to understand that. Again, that drives humility. That drives the. I'll show you one more example of this. Again, is this? You guys all know Instagram, right? Assuming Instagram is the place where you put that one kind of the day's most beautiful photo on there, right? So if you took this shot at the beach, right? She makes the photo. Fat dad does not make the photo in the cropping, right? Turns out that's a lot of pressure, right? It's a lot of pressure for people to put these together. And I don't know if this is a phenomenon in Germany or not, but in the U.S., I have a teenage daughter, and I learned this from her. This is a particularly heavy pressure on teenage girls. And so what teenage girls have done is they've created this thing called Finsta, or Finstagram, which is a fake Instagram account. Have you guys heard about this? Right? Essentially, what it is private Instagram groups for only their friends, where they can put on stuff like this, silly pictures that they draw on, that they make funny comments on. They're not the most beautiful picture of the day, right? Instagram never predicted this, right? This emerged from the use of their product, right? And they can now, Snapchat, you could argue that this drove some of the genesis of Snapchat and now Instagram stories, obviously, right? As these kind of ephemeral opportunities to create these passing moments. Right? But Instagram never predicted this. This emerged from use, and they adopted this into the way that they build the products. And you see this over and over and over again, right? This is Twitter when they launched, right? There's no mention at all of the hashtag, right? It came from the users. Users came up with hashtags, right? Chris Messina came up with it. Now they've adopted it as a feature. You can monetize it. And today, in fact, Twitter announced that they've officially launched threading, like an actual thread feature. Like people have been running these tweet storms and these threads forever, right? Twitter saw that, they've adopted that, they've built that into their product. That's humility, right? That's humility that says we're looking for our customers to help us evolve our products and move them forward. And that's the key behind humility as a quality in an organization that encourages learning. Now, we get to that humility through experimentation, right? I showed you that experimentation. And experimentation helps us understand what our MVP is. MVP stands for minimum viable product. I'm sure you all know that. And yet everywhere I go, everybody's got 10 different definitions of what MVP is. I actually really like this diagram. I think it does a great job of showing what you're looking for. And the question that you're trying to answer with your MVP is this. What's the smallest thing that we can make or do to test our assumptions? Right? We've got some design assumptions. We've got some product assumptions, right? We're humble. We know that they may not be right. What's the least amount of work that we can put in to learn whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea, right? Those two modal overlays on Map My Run, that was their MVP, right? To test whether or not this was a feature they should invest in. This is Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company's been making cars for 100 years. Okay, you figure they'd be like, hey, we've been making cars for 100 years. We essentially invented the car, right? Almost, right? Almost. I know I'm in Germany. I know. I've been to Stuttgart twice this year, in fact. Right? But they said, look, we're gonna build autonomous vehicles, right? We don't know how to build autonomous vehicles. How will people react to autonomous vehicles? Right? How will people react to a car that's driving itself? Should we build a car that drives itself? In this case, I said, hold on, that's going to be expensive, and we may not get it right. So let's do this. Let's disguise a guy as a car seat. Right? That's their experiment. And that's what he looks like driving the car. That's what the car looks like when he's driving it. And again, why? Why? Because they were humble about this. They needed to understand how people would react to a self-driving car before they built a self-driving car, because that information will feed how they design and build that self-driving car. And again, that's experimentation, and that's learning, and that's humility, right? MVPs can be any scope. This is CNBC. Sorry, CNBC. They're actually based out of New Jersey, where I used to live. Right? They got a new website. The editor-in-chief posts a tweet. He's got a lot of followers. See who clicks through, right? What are you trying to learn? Is there even any interest, right, in our new site? Perhaps my favorite example of MVP and customers is from, I found this recently, I watched a movie called The Founder. How many of you have seen this movie, The Founder? Just a few of you, good. The Founder is the story of McDonald's Corporation, and specifically about Ray Kroc, who's Michael Keaton is playing in this movie, and about how he essentially stole the idea from the McDonald's brothers, right, and made it into this, it's a pretty fascinating movie based on true stories. Now, I'm gonna show you this 3.5-minute video clip here. This is where the McDonald's brothers explain to Ray Kroc, who's kind of going to be their franchisor all over the country, how they came up with their custom kitchen, right? So the unique value proposition that they'll talk about here is that they're changing the way that Americans eat and order food, where it would normally take you 30 minutes to get your meal. They're like, look, we're going to do it in 30 seconds. Okay? And this is how they came up with their custom kitchen idea. It's fascinating.
And that's what brings us to the biggest cut of all.
Which was?
The wait.
Orders ready in 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. Mecca.
We look at each other one night.
You thinking what I'm thinking?
We're gonna have to tear down, rebuild, reconfigure, rethink the whole dang thing.
We're talking about shutting down a thriving business for months.
People are gonna think we're crazy.
We were crazy.
And you were gonna love how we did it, Dick. You gotta tell him.
Tennis court?
Okay. He brings me out to this tennis court, and he's drawn this line, the exact dimensions of our kitchen.
Sink on the right, extruder on the left. Extruder. Bagging and hood.
Hood. Okay.
Garnish. This is burger finish.
Got it.
And then this is burger slide. We could just move those.
Okay.
Multi-mixer soft drinks.
Okay. We bring out our whole staff, and we have them go through the motions, making pretend burgers and fries.
All right, Steve, anticipate that. You gotta keep the tray level. Okay.
And Dick is running around with this stick, marking where all the equipment should be.
Tuck in. Tony, are you gonna skip the pickles when we're really doing it?
They do it over and over, hashing it out, choreographing it like some crazy burger ballet. What's going on over there?
Yes. No. Everybody stop! Stop! Garnish 1. Garnish 2. You've got pickles, you've got onions. It's a goddamn hamburger.
Come on, clear off.
Let's clear it off. It's time for the pink chalk. And then rip your orange. See all this open space here now? We've rearranged the fry situation, so now it's stage left, the deep fryer stage right. Begin. That's great. Come on, guys.
We're pretty tied up here.
Yeah, watch it.
The Lazy Susan.
It's the timing of the Lazy Susan. Those are finished burgers. You can't... Hold it. I still think there's a third version.
What do you want to move?
I want to move everything. Back to stage left, please. Got it all drawn. This is better.
Is that all right?
I think so. I guess let's assume our battle stations.
Okay.
Finally, after about 6 hours of this, we get it just right. It's a symphony of efficiency, not a wasted motion. Good form, Jasper. Feel good about those pickles. Catch up. Use your Lazy Susan. Put your back into it, Seth. And pickles and pickle and mustard. We take the layout to a builder, custom build the kitchen to our exact specs.
Ta-da! The Speed D system is born, the world's first ever system to deliver food fast. It is totally revolutionary.
Right? Pretty amazing, right? True story, too. Like they had to build a custom kitchen that no one had ever built before. They could have designed it on a piece of paper, given it to a fabricator, fabricated the kitchen, and found out that they were wrong 3 times after producing the kitchen. Instead, they worked on a tennis court with chalk, and they faked it, right? They improvised until they figured it out, and then they sent the specs, and they built their kitchen, right? So they've now revolutionized eating in the 50s, right? 30 minutes to 30 seconds, a new speedy kitchen, right? Get out there and change things, right? Well, it turns out that it's not enough, right? Just to experiment and build a great kitchen.
It is totally revolutionary.
And a complete disaster.
Why? Opening day, cars pull up onto the lot, and they start honking immediately because no car hop comes up.
You place your order.
We try to explain to them the walk-up window, and they are bewildered. No, they're furious. What do you mean I gotta get out of my car? Most of them just cuss us out and drive off, and the few that stay are mad as heck because they're reading off paper and they've got to discard their own trash.
Why? You're doing great. You're doing great.
Yeah, we won't be coming out to the car, but you can just come on up. Welcome to McDonald's.
We may have underestimated the learning curve.
So by 5 o'clock, Dick is calculating how much it's going to cost to go back to driving. But I am not ready to throw in the towel. I go back to our old Hollywood days. I think to myself, we got to go big with this. We got to put on a show. So I say, Dick, I want to throw a grand reopening, a gala premiere that would put Louis B. Mayer to shame. So we rent a bunch of spotlights. Same ones we used to haul around in the Columbia days. We get sparklers, a juggler for the kiddies. It is an event. People show up in droves. And then
The flies. They must have been drawn by all the lights.
millions of them. It was like a scene out of Exodus.
The Pharaoh would have released the Israelites.
Right. So they build this great product, right? And they ship it, and they forgot about the customers, right? They forgot about the mental model of dining in the 1950s, right? People are used to driving up, not to get out of their cars. People are used to eating off of real plates with real silverware, and they're not used to throwing away their own garbage. So just because they prototyped a fantastic product doesn't mean that that product actually makes sense, right? For that time, so they really had to re-educate the population, and in their case, they were actually successful in doing so. But the thing to think about, right, is how do we make sure that we're not only solving a real problem for our customers, but that we're measuring their behavior, we're taking into account their current behavior in building products that actually work for them. And what you saw in that situation was iteration, right? They got things wrong, and they iterate. This is wrong, by the way. Horrible. This is a picture from my house. I just want to be clear. I didn't do this either. When you get it wrong, you try again until you get it right, right? And again, the lower the investment, like if it's on a tennis court, you iterate and then you get it right. And you're using the data, both, not this data, obviously, the quantitative data about what people are doing and the qualitative data of why people are doing it to understand how to iterate your ideas forward. And you're doing that together as a team. And I want to make that perfectly clear, right? Research is not a luxury. Right? Research is part of the cycle. This is a key thing to integrating kind of a leaner design process and a leaner UX and a much better product development process. Research is not something that we let go. Right? You saw it. Like they thought they built a great product, right? This great kitchen that delivered food quickly, but they didn't think about the end user. Research is something that happens in every sprint, in every cycle. Instead of doing a lot of research, we do less of it, and we do it more often. Right, at every sprint. And what this does, by going out and seeking quantitative and qualitative feedback during every cycle, is it builds agility into our teams. As that feedback comes in, we're able to adjust course based on what we're learning. And the more agile, lowercase a we are, the more we're used to changing course based on that feedback, the more responsive we can be in any situation. So no matter what's going on around you or what you're learning, right, you can always be this guy. Right? That's who you want to be. Right? This is every team's aspiration, right? Is to be that guy. No matter what's going on around you, you want to be leaning back, drinking a beer, and like relaxed, right? Because you know what? We invested a little bit, we learned that we were wrong, and we're going to move forward, which again, because ultimately, right, what we ship is not as important as did we change customer behavior. That becomes our measure of success. That becomes our definition of done. That becomes how we determine whether we continue working on this. Hey, we've been spending on this for 6 months. We cannot seem to get customers to add more than one thing into their shopping cart every time they visit. Maybe we should focus on something else. Maybe we should fund a different project. Maybe this isn't the right thing for us to focus on. And it gives you that objective lens as opposed to that subjective lens, right? The subjective lens says, I think it should be blue, or we should have an app, or it should have news on it, or a chat bot, or AR, or whatever it is, right? And instead it says, hey, are we getting customers to do the thing that they are trying to do more and more of and that we care about? And if not, let's objectively look at why not and decide whether or not we want to move forward. Now, there's one word of caution that I want to give you on this, is that the thing that gets really interesting here and really challenging is staying on the path. As you start to iterate and as you start to learn and you start to really build a nice kind of continuous learning cycle with your product managers, your designers, your engineers, everybody's thinking about the customer and moving towards outcomes, you can start to lose sight of the big picture, of the vision of what you set out to solve in the first place. My favorite story of this, I have a friend named Tendai Vicky. He used to be a professor in Kent, England, and he was teaching lean startup and entrepreneurship there. And it was a class where teams would form at the beginning of the semester, and they would say, we're going to build this kind of company, and they would practice lean startup for 12 weeks, and at the end, they would kind of show what they came up with at the end of 12 weeks. He said he had this one team that at the beginning of the semester said, we are going to build a healthy eating service for students. He said, great, go do it. And so they did. They went and they ran experiments, they talked to customers, they designed ideas, and they iterated and they got feedback from the market. And at the end of the semester, they launched an alcohol delivery service. Right? Because that's what the market told them that they wanted, right? They're the market of 18 to 22-year-old college students, right? But for them, right, they lost track of the vision. They got off the path. They just kind of iterated and iterated away from their vision. And so, if we can conjure up where is it? The ghost of Steve Jobs. There he is. The ghost of Steve Jobs. It's to say this, right? It's to just say, look, keep the vision. Right? Iterate on the details, but always go back to that big picture. Someone's got to say, hey, but how are we actually building a healthy eating service for students? Right? I know they're saying they want a drink, but is there another angle here, right, for us? Is there a healthy beer, right, or whatever it is, right? What's the angle that we're looking for? Don't lose sight of the vision. Now, the last 2 points I'll close with is this. Look, this changes everything. If you adopt these ways of working, if you build cross-functional teams of product managers, designers, and engineers, if you manage to outcomes, right? If you open up your design process, if you open up your product development processes to be radically transparent, if you build continuous learning into that process, it changes the way that you work. If you work in an agency, it fundamentally shifts your business model. You can ask me all about this. I ran one of these agencies for 4 years. We can do it in the Q&A if you'd like. It changes what you sell. It changes how you sell it. It changes how you partner with your clients. It changes your definition of done and your success. If you work in-house, hopefully it's a little less dreary than that. It changes everything, right? We have to distribute our designers, distribute our engineers, build these cross-functional teams, right? Manage to outcomes, create a safe environment to experiment, to learn, to iterate, to move forwards, right? We have to start changing the measure of success and the definition of done to not just did we finish the tasks or the user stories, but did we validate that that's a user story that was worth doing? Right? And if it wasn't, how do we fix that in the next retrospective? There's a really easy place to start here. I'll give you one really quick tip about how to start here, particularly with in-house teams. Right? You can use this in a consulting context as well, but it's really easy. Change the name of the team. Super easy. Let me give you an example. Okay? If I put you on a team and I tell you you are on the iPhone app team, right? What's the mission of that team? Ship the app, right? Build the app. And your measure of success is, did we ship the app? Right? Pretty easy. If we take the same exact people and we just say, the name of this team is the mobile commerce team. Right? What's the mission of that team now? Right? Increase mobile commerce. Right? Maybe it's an app. Right? Maybe it's beacons. Maybe it's augmented reality. Maybe it's chatbots. Maybe it's whatever. Right? But it's the team's job to find out. That's why we hired them. Right? All of a sudden, we've given them an outcome, and again, the domain is still the same. All of this is to say is that as we start to think about how to integrate design and product management and engineering in an agile context, we have to move away from this culture of delivery and really drive up this belief in a culture of learning. Thanks very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for this nice presentation and a lot of insight from your experience.
Sure.
From my experience, I see the biggest problem in changing thinking is empathy. So how in your career did your empathy towards customers and teams and others evolve? What is your personal journey in terms of not having the biases or the stereotypes that we normally face as the godlike designers?
Yeah.
So what is the empathy path?
Yeah, great question, and I think you're right. I think the more that not only designers and engineers and product managers, but executives have customer empathy or user empathy, the more we can move towards an outcome-driven mindset. It's fascinating how even as seasoned practitioners, even steeped in these ideas that we talk about, it's still hugely for me, I can tell you, to me personally, to go put my ideas out in front of customers. In fact, today, I've got a new idea I'm thinking about for 2018. Today, I sent 7 or 8 emails to target audience. I said, hey, can I have 20 minutes of your time to talk about this? I was pretty terrified about sending those emails because I don't want to hear that it's a bad idea, right? I really don't. And I think I don't think it ever gets easier, but it always makes your product better. And so for my personal journey, I mean, look, when I started my career, it was, hey, can I go watch the user researchers do it? Because I worked at AOL. I started my career at big companies and then big consulting companies and then ultimately AOL, which had a big research team. So it was, hey, can I just go sit in and watch the session where there's 10 minutes that's actually relevant to me? I think the most important shift that I've made over the years is that not only am I running my own sessions, but I'm actually bringing in as many of the other team members as possible into those sessions as well. So bringing engineers in and having them run the sessions, even though, you know what, and researchers are gonna, they're gonna hate me for saying that, right? People who don't do this on a regular basis aren't gonna do a great job at it at first, which is true, but it's still valuable for them to hear it firsthand, right? To be there and to hear firsthand that the thing that you built that you thought was awesome, it wasn't that awesome, right? But and there's ways to make it better. And so and kind of again, the more you can do it, the cadences and the frequency helps to kind of reduce the friction and drives up the empathy. So we you know, at kind of going back to the latter story, at its peak, we were testing every week, or like talking. It's not even testing. Talking to customers every week, right? It was a half day, usually on Thursday mornings, 3 or 4 customers, just to keep that conversation going. You'll find there's companies like Meetup, for example, in New York, who recently got acquired, actually, which is pretty cool after a long time. That they had really taken this to an extreme. Like they were kind of running. They started kind of once a week, and then every day, and then they created a whole kind of internal recruiting function to make sure that if you needed customer feedback, there were always people who you were able to talk to on a daily basis, right? And so for me, it's about making sure that you're always putting yourself out there to have those conversations about your own work, preferably, and then bringing in the others. And then if there's any opportunity that you have, if you're ever in a position to show or to show customer feedback or to bring executives with you, to me that was hugely powerful. I'll tell you one more quick story. I was working with an executive team at a bank last year in the United States, and we were working on an internal project. And these are the top people in this bank, like literally the president, right? All of the kind of the executive vice presidents, and we were talking about some pretty sensitive stuff about staffing and office openings and office closings. And one of the things that we had to determine was kind of what was the atomic unit of planning. In other words, what was the smallest number of people that we couldn't break up, because they were an Agile organization, and we didn't want to chop up the teams. And there was one guy who's been there for 25 years, right? And he said, look, I know the answer. Right? And he said, this is what it should be. And he kind of put it in the done column. And then we took him and 2 other executives to go talk to the actual people who do the work on a daily basis. And they obviously told him that it was not what he had thought it was. Right? And that was a very eye-opening experience for him. So the more that you can drag people out and to have them either have them lead these conversations or just sit in on them, it drives that home. So for me, that's been the journey, doing it like just observing, doing it myself, bringing in others, and now trying to drag as many executives to those sessions as possible. But I agree, hugely powerful.
Hey, I got 2 questions. The first one is you talked about assumptions and the vision being very important, which is then or kind of the basis for the MVP. The question that comes to my mind, and also the things that I experience, is how do you kind of deal with the assumptions, right? Because it's kind of a product. It's kind of like in a product decision, what features do you want to build, what functions you're going to have in there. It's about what assumptions are the crucial ones, right?
Yep.
Which is closely connected to the vision as well, because then you need to think of what of the assumptions are connected with our vision. So any advice or experience on how to deal with the assumptions, how to prioritize them, how to select them, etc., etc. And the second one is, can you just drop some lines around how the agency model will change once you adopted kind of a more lean or UX?
Yep. So yeah, it's two very separate questions. So let's start with the first one. Prioritizing assumptions. The most important thing, I think, so vision, obviously, we want to build a healthy eating service for students. That's good. How will we know we've built a successful healthy eating service for students? Let's declare our success, our outcomes up front. Right, so we'll know that's successful if we've signed up 100 students by the end of the year, and 50 of them have created profiles, and 25 of them are actually ordering our, Soylent product or whatever it is, right? Like whatever it is, right? But so setting the vision, and then the success criteria. Right, the actual outcomes. Now, we've got, those are also assumptions, but they are the assumptions that we are going to use as filters for all of the other assumptions. So now we've got ideas about what we should build, how to build it, how to design it, the interaction model, the business model, right, whatever it is. Right, let's get all those out there, and let's run them through those filters. Which one of these ideas do we believe will help us hit the 3 outcomes that we care about for the next 6 months? Okay, so that's going to chop out a bunch of assumptions. Right? Then it's going to leave you with hopefully a smaller set of assumptions, at which point it just depends on how much info you have. And at some point you're just going to have to take a guess, right? And say, look, we believe that this approach is more likely to succeed than this approach. And so what that means is we're going to try that one first. Now, trying that one first shouldn't, in most cases, mean, well, we're going to work for 18 months and see if it works. It means we're going to start to run lightweight experiments. And as long as we continue to get positive signal, we're going to continue down this path. But if we start to get negative signal from the market, right, that we're not getting the outcomes that we're looking for, then we're going to stop working on this, and we're going to move on to the next thing in our backlog. Right? So that the outcomes become your filtering criteria and your prioritization criteria. But at some point, you're just going to have to take a guess. Right? Your best guess based on what you know today. Now, as long as you don't kind of roll the entire organization or the team or the budget on that one guess, you're in good shape, unless you're continuing to get good feedback. So that's the key. And of course, as soon as you start to run experiments, you're getting more data, which allows you to prioritize better and see where your assumptions line up and don't line up. So that's how I would go about it for prioritizing assumptions. Now, your second question was just touching any thoughts on the agency model. So kind of at a high level, we built a company called Neo. We spent 4 years trying to sell consulting work this way. It was difficult. It was difficult for a variety of reasons, and the reasons changed over the course of those 4 years. The years were 2012 through the end of 2015, just to give you a sense. Things to think about. You have to set expectations from the beginning about what your model is, right? People have been buying services for a long time, and essentially their expectation is, I will give you money, you will go away, make the thing that I told you to, and then you'll bring it back when you're done, right? That's the expectation, right? You've got to be upfront from grounds, from first contact, from your website, from your tweets, from whatever it is, right? This is how we work, and it's different. We are your partners. We are not your outsourcing firm, right? We're not your offshore department, right? That type of thing. Second, what you sell and how you sell it. And this is by far the most difficult thing. You're not selling features, and you're not selling deliverables. You're selling outcomes, right? Really more, actually, it's not even that. You're selling time. That's what it is. And that's what we did. We ended up selling time. Like people would say, listen, we'd like to create this kind of two-sided marketplace, and we'd like to see these folks interacting with each other. We said, great. Let's dedicate 3 months. We'll put this team on it, right? And this is how we'll start to kind of knock that problem down. And at the end of 3 months, if we're making good progress and you like how we're working, you can buy another 3 months and another 3 months after that. So again, part of that is selling time. And again, the definition of success is not, did you build me a two-sided marketplace at the end of that 3 months, is did you get these folks to interact in a way that matters to them and matters to us as a business, which again, we want to set those success criteria at the beginning. Now, that's a very idealistic way of looking at it, and but it's a very difficult sale. I tell you that right now. It's difficult with clients. It's particularly difficult with government. We had a government agency approach us one time, and they had a very clear outcome. This was it was one of the big United States, one of the big states in the United States. It was their legislature, their Senate, or the Congress, like the state's Congress, right? And they have a $6 million annual postage bill. Right? They spend $6 million taxpayer dollars every year on stamps to send you stuff in the mail. And they said, look, we want to build an online interaction system, kind of like Facebook, kind of like Gmail, whatever it is, right? And as long as the project costs less than what it saves us, then we're ahead. Right? And our goal is to reduce the cost of stamps. That's great. That's a great outcome, right? People sending less mail, and by people I mean the state senators, right? Sending less mail. That's a great outcome. And they said, great, here's the 100 features we want you to build to do that. And we said, look, we don't know which one of those 100 features are going to work. And they said, great, but we can't sign a check unless you tell us exactly what you're going to make for us. Right? And that's where the problem gets really tricky, is how do you structure these contracts in a way that organizations will actually buy from you, even though you're not committing to specific features by a specific deadline. Right? So and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of at a high level, that's where to start thinking about it.
Do you have a take on OKRs?
Absolutely. I love OKRs. I'm going to publish a book about them. Next year. It's not up here. But, OKR, I'm not going to write it. Someone else is going to write it, but we're going to publish it. OKRs are outcomes, right, essentially, right? When done well, they're outcomes. The KR, anyway. The KR bit is an outcome, not the O, the KR, right, is the outcome. Now, when they're done well, they work really well with everything that I just talked about for the last hour. Right? Because again, so objectives and key results, for those of you who don't know, right? The objective is some kind of a qualitative, aspirational goal for the company. We want to be the best or the biggest or the most successful or the number one player in our space. And the KR bit is the how will we know? Like, what's the measure of success? Right? And again, when done well, those KRs are measures of customer behavior, right? 50%, we have 50% market share. Of those 50%, 50% of them are coming to the site, 2 times every week, right? There's referrals, whatever it is, right? Any kind of customer activity when done well. The problem with OKRs is that they're often done poorly, and that the KR ends up, when I've seen it done poorly, the KR typically ends up being a feature, right? Like, we want to be the number one car inventory, online car inventory provider for the automotive industry. And the KR, so that's a nice objective, right? Being the number one something, right? And the KR is, we will have shipped this database by Thursday, right? Or something along those lines, which is a feature, right? Not a change in customer behavior. So OKRs are fantastic when the KR is a measure of customer behavior. Okay?
I've got a question about incorporating clients in the process.
Yeah.
So we actually tried to have a Slack channel and to throw in there every single thing we do. So every wireframe that got produced get in there to get immediate feedback on everything. We got pretty quick the result that this was too much, because there was too much feedback on too much material. So the question is, do you have any at first any good amount of people where you would say this is a good amount of people to be in that team of giving feedback? And the other thing is, can you recommend a specific approach on giving stuff out?
Absolutely. So again, without knowing a lot of the context for your team or your company or your clients or so forth, so I'm gonna share with you how we did it at Neo, which is the most recent example I have of kind of a full-on consulting company. The way that we did it was that we had one or two, maybe three members of the client function as core members of the team. So it was us and them. And generally speaking, they came and they sat with us in our office at least 3 or 4 days a week. Again, we would go to their office if they needed it, but we had a cooler office. So generally, so they would come and they liked coming to our office. So they would come and sit with us for 3 or 4 days. They were core members of the team. They participated in stand-ups. They participated in backlog prioritization. They were there every day deciding on things. For those members of the team, right, Slack channels, daily reviews, wireframes, emails, whatever it is, was fine because they had the day-to-day context. Right, so it wasn't too much. They were in the thick of it. This was the only thing they were working on, right? But there was always the extended team, right? The rest of the client, the rest of the organization, the integration team, whatever it was, right? For those people, we had to create very structured and prepared checkpoints. Now, whether those were weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, depending on the work, the client, the how often they wanted to be a part of it, but we would synthesize and distill kind of the month's activities into a checkpoint meeting with the extended team. Now, the nice thing about that is that it wasn't like that kind of that terrifying design review that I talked about at the beginning of my talk, right? Because we've got their people on the team, right? So we never had to stand up there by ourselves and defend the work, right? This was a collaborative effort that their people have been involved with on a regular basis. Hopefully they've been communicating back out to the broader team as well, so that when these folks show up, we give them a very clear kind of progress report, share whatever we're working on, what are some of the challenges, right? But it's not a review so much as it was sort of a checkpoint and kind of just a clarification about where we're headed moving forward, right? So to us, that model worked very, very well. Right, because again, it was a collaboration, and it really reduced the number of folks that we had to deal with on a daily basis, which made it much more manageable.
Product development and, for example, adding new features, making new version of the product, it's clear. And also validating the ideas, it's also clear. But what about, finding new innovative ideas, not another version of the existing product, but really innovative ideas, for example, for industry companies. Should we use different methods or different tools than this, or what should we do? I mean, large corporations have innovation department, but it's not efficient. And how to solve this problem in the age of digitalization?
Look, I think the nice thing, and it's an interesting question, right? Is innovation kind of the same thing here? The nice thing about working in an increasingly software-driven world is that the pace at which you can learn is increasing dramatically, and regardless of what you're making, right? Even if you're making physical products, right? 3D printing gives you the opportunity to really kind of validate a lot of your assumptions very early, very quickly, and very cheaply. So I think that the core concepts stand, whether you're working on an existing product or trying to find a new innovation or a new business model or whatever it is, right? You've got a vision, you've got outcomes, measures of success, and you've got experiments, assumptions that you want to run experiments against, right? So I think generally speaking, those concepts exist. How you generate new ideas, right? There's again an infinite number of ways to do that. How you think about innovation, there's an infinite number of ways to do that. That is, I think that's unique to your culture and how you think. What is the scope of the innovation mandate that your team has, right? One of my favorite models that I like to use is Dublin's 10 Types of Innovation. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a really great book, easy read, right? And what Larry Dublin essentially says, he's at Deloitte now in the UK, is you can think about innovation on 10 different facets, I guess, right? So you can innovate on your delivery channel, right? Hey, so far we've been kind of you had to go to the supermarket to buy food. Now we can bring food to you, right? That's a different channel, right? You can innovate on the business model, right? Hey, you come to the store every week and you buy tomatoes. Why don't you subscribe to tomatoes, right? We'll just ship kind of 3 tomatoes every Monday, right? Thinking about different ways and then you as an organization have to decide whether, this is something that's amenable to you, something you want to get into, something you're good at, something you can sustain, right? But I think at the core, the principles are the same, right? Vision, outcomes, assumptions, and experiments, to me, that work well. And the structure of a cross-functional team, understanding the customer, building empathy, making sure that you're solving a meaningful problem, right, for real customers is key to successful innovation, right? Every now and again, very rarely, someone gets lucky with an idea that goes big that didn't really seem to solve any particular need. For the most part, every huge successful innovation, right, has solved some kind of a meaningful problem for people in a new and interesting way, right? So I would work on figuring that out as well. Okay.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I have a question. You already mentioned that getting a lot of feedback sometimes makes creative people nervous if it's not really completely done yet. How did you manage that? Because I have made the experience that if we get a lot of early feedback, there tend to be people that want to kind of dictate down like where each button is and which color the button is, and that does not make creative people happy. Yeah.
So it's a really great question, right? The way I have a counterintuitive answer. I think it's counterintuitive. I don't know. It seemed counterintuitive to me at the time, which was to show the work even sooner, right? So if it was a sketch on a whiteboard, or if it was a pencil on paper, right, or whatever it is, so that you're not dictating colors to me, right? When it's a sketch on a whiteboard, right? No one is going to say move the button here, move the button there. It's more like here's the concept, right? Let's talk about this as a concept. And what happens is I think that if you show that and you start to get some feedback, the next time you show, you say, hey, you remember when we talked the last time I showed you that sketch, right? You said, hey, move the button to the right. Well, it turns out that actually made sense, so I did that. Right? And then, but what I also did was I added these other things. And now we're going to put it in front of customers and just make sure that works. Right? So I think that as long as you can speak, what I did was, again, show the work sooner, and then address the feedback. Every new cycle, like every new kind of informal conversation, I would always address the last thing that we talked about. Right? Remember last time we talked about this? Right? Here's what I did with that feedback. And there were times, look, I'll be perfectly honest with you, there were times where you kind of have to say, look, remember that when we talked about that last time? Right? I didn't do anything with that. Right? Right? And here's why I didn't do anything with that. Right? So as long as you can speak intelligently, right, to kind of, and I don't mean to sound like that. I mean, as long as you can have kind of a good case for why you made certain design decisions, and making sure that you acknowledge the feedback that you got in the past, that generally works well. Not with everybody, right? There's always going to be egos, and there's always going to be people who push back harder. But generally speaking, if you're acknowledging that I've given you feedback, and at some point I can see that something I've said to you made it into the work, right? Most people will settle down. Not everybody, but that's what worked for me. Does that help? Okay.
I think the next question can add to this what you said just a second ago. When Ebbinghaus, he's a famous psychologist, when he ran into experiments about the learning curve, how many vocabulary can I learn in a different amount of time, he had another concept. It was about forgetting, and he has a forgetting curve. So when you are talking about we want to speed up our learning process, what would be the opposite? Would there be a good idea to have a culture of forgetting in order to find the right product or to find the right need or to help customers? Because what comes to data-driven decision-making in design or in other business decisions, we are not trying to forget. We are collecting more and more data, and it becomes more complex as we collect more data, and it is especially difficult for us to interpret, to understand what the data is meaning for us. So my philosophical idea is, what would be the help to make it lean again, to forget things, to make it even more human-centristic? You understand? Because I think we cannot move up to a very high speed of learning. So there must be a counterculture in forgetting. What about this?
It's interesting. I don't know. I've never thought about it, so I don't have a pithy answer or any answer really at all. I think the one red flag, perhaps the one thing that I would caution at least, and I don't really have any kind of deep thought on this because it's the first time I've heard it, is just to make sure that we don't repeat mistakes that we've made in the past. Right? I think to me that would be the biggest risk, right? So, I worked on a team once where we felt we had all the answers, right? And we went in and we started kind of hacking through this legacy system, and there was a reason why the legacy system was built a certain way, and we didn't bother to find out. And so as we started hacking our way through the code and the interface and the experience, we broke a lot of stuff, right? Stuff that we could have avoided had we taken the time to find that kind of stuff out. So to me, that would be the only risk, right? Is if you forget too much or you forget the wrong thing, and then you end up causing perhaps more harm than good. But I don't know, right? I don't know. Give me something to think about.
Seeing your book title, Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, and your introduction overview with the team struggling, working in an agile way. So is there a recipe from your experience, or is it just it depends on the team and on the product, how we can combine UX with Agile, like Scrum?
I don't think there's a recipe. I think there are values or like principles that you want to embed as a way of working, almost like a work contract. I think that and then I think there are good starting points. I don't want to call it a recipe because I don't think it works for everybody. But I think there's some good starting points that you can then evolve as you figure out what works for you in your unique context with your unique teams, right? So the principles are again, we talked a little bit about humility, we talked about transparency, right? We talked about learning over delivery, we talked about customer centricity, right? Those are the principles that you want to live, I think, at any scope, at the team or at the company scale. And then I think as far as starting points, generally speaking, if a team comes to me and they say, look, where should we start? To me, I think it's short cycles, so a week or 2 week, whatever you feel like. Essentially I would tell them to build a cross-functional team, product design and engineering, do stand-ups and do retrospectives. Like, to me, that's a good place to start, right? And then figure it out from there, right? Figure out what visualization makes sense for you, what tools you'd like to use. Is 2 weeks too long? Should we do a week? Is a week too short? Should we do 2 weeks, right? Do we have the right people on the team? Right? Ultimately, that figures itself out. But to me, I think it's, as long as we're kind of thinking about things through those lenses, through those principles, and we just start somewhere, and then, because again, the iteration process is not just for your product, right? And the Agile, kind of the Agile Manifesto certainly talks about this. The iteration is for your process as well, right? So if something didn't work over the last sprint, let's talk about it. Let's understand why, and let's do it differently. Like why keep making the same mistake every sprint, right? So to me, I don't know if that's I hesitate to call that a recipe, because I usually try to speak out against recipes. Because it's not one size fits all, right? But it's a good starting point. And then I think that as you kind of put the realities of your business around it, it'll change, it'll morph. Okay.
My question refers to this slide with the cycle of ship, sense, and respond. And I started to think about how the communication or the discussion between the Scrum team, me as a designer, and the product management could look like if I started to apply these principles and come to the conclusion that my last couple of user stories were more, not really outcomes, but just deliverables. And I also have a sense of or idea of what the mistake were and how we can improve. What would the discussion with the product management or the common sense would look like to get those insight into the next sprint? Because there are always higher prioritized user stories or features that are already prioritized in the backlog. So how can we feed in this understanding of the sense and respond into the next sprint or into the backlog? Yeah.
So it's the same answer that I gave that gentleman over there, right? Is you change your measure of you change your measure of success and you change your definition of done, right? The definition of done is not, hey, we ship these 5 features. Right? The definition of done, or at least the definition of validated, changes to we changed customer behavior by this much, right? One of the, we increased retention by 50%. We got, job seekers to contact employers 3 more times, to respond to employers 3 times more than they have in the past. Something along those lines, right? And if look, I want to be clear, right? We have to ship code, right? Like we have to ship features. We have to get features out the door. I just want to make sure that when we do that, we're working on the features that we believe, based on as much fact as we can collect as quickly as possible, right? That stand the greatest chance of achieving our outcomes. And if they don't, we should be willing to admit that and roll that back. Because at some point, right, if you think about that concept of MVP, right, when I coach teams, right, essentially the conversations we have are really simple, like they're deceptively simple. Right? And there's 2 questions that I use to frame kind of the conversation that I would have with your team if you came to me and said, hey, help us with this, right? To me, the question would be, what's the most important thing you need to learn next? Right? So based on where you are in the process, what's the most important thing you need to learn next? Right? That's the first question. And it's a simple question, but it's not easy to answer. Right? And then once the team kind of builds a consensus around that answer, the second question I would ask you is this: what's the least amount of work that you need to do to learn that? Right? Now, in some cases, depending on what you need to learn, you may need to build an experiment, right? A landing page test, a Wizard of Oz, whatever it is. In other cases, you're going to have to build code. You're going to have to ship, hey, I need to see if this idea scales to more than 5 users. I need to see if we can build a business model around this. I need to see if we can sustain this service as an organization, right? That's the most important thing that we need to learn next, right? So based on the answers to those questions, that helps prioritize the backlog, and you're always using the feedback from each iteration to inform the answers to those questions and to inform kind of what you do next. But again, the fundamental shift is changing the measure of success to outcomes from output. Because if you're still managing the output, then the most important thing you need to learn next is, am I going to ship it by Thursday? Right? Which is the same question every week. Right? So you don't have to ask that question anymore.
I thank you very much for once more, but I have maybe it's too specific. I'm not sure how, but if I imagine we have a lot of teams, and every team works on a product, and all these products will get the same customer, and I want a coherent customer experience. Yeah. How can I reach it?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is where this becomes really interesting, and we talk a lot about it. So you've got a copy of Sense and Respond, which you got today, I hope, right? The green book? Yes. Yeah? That one. Good, because we talk a lot about that in that book as well. But essentially, the scaling bit is difficult, right? So this is where we get into kind of all these frameworks that people are now selling and that type of thing. I'll give you one specific answer, one tactical answer, and then it's not going to solve everything, but it starts to kind of head in the right direction. Instead of giving each team a different outcome to achieve, right? You take a set of teams, 5 teams or 10 teams or whatever it is, and you give them the same outcome or outcomes to achieve. What that forces them to do is it forces them to self-organize, to be transparent and communicate with each other, to share knowledge, to manage that knowledge, because they know that they win or lose together. Not just my team, but the 5 teams together are going to win or lose together, because we're all measured on the same success criteria. So that helps force it, because the risk, right? The risk, if you take 5 teams and you give each team a different outcome, each team is going to optimize locally. And if my measure of success is retention and your measure of success is acquisition, right? You might say, hey, you know what? Email marketing, that drives acquisition. Let me just send 1,000 emails, right? Or 1,000,000 emails, right? Meanwhile, that's crushing my retention statistics. But you don't care because you're being incentivized to drive acquisition, right? So if we take 5 teams and we say those 5 teams, right? You guys are on retention. That's your customer outcome, right? Your KR, if you will, right? Is retention. They have to figure out how to work together. That starts to solve the scaling problem. It's by far not a. It just scratches the surface, but it starts to solve it. It's giving sets of teams the same measure of success, and then saying, look, you guys figure out how to work together. Thanks, folks. It was really great to be here.
Thank you also for taking the time.